Hi everyone, so for my lightning talk today, I'm going to be going over the assigned chapters from the climate book this week, as well as chapter 4.11, which directly connects to my paper, which is about, again, chemical use and overuse of pesticides in farming and those harmful effects from that unsustainable practice. All right, so for the first takeaway, I'm talking about inaction of leaders, which is seen in chapter 4.9 and 4.4. Often our leaders come from privileged backgrounds and they actively choose inaction when it comes to the climate crisis. And even though they have the power and resources to, do something about it, they don't. And so in my personal life, when I notice politicians and media shy away from talking about the climate crisis, I try to go towards it and talk to family and friends, because these conversations really help me feel less passive and feel like I'm doing something. And I think it's the most important way to start the grassroots movements. And then for my paper, this connects, how governments enable large-scale chemical use in agriculture, ignoring the long-term consequences, and they're not doing anything about it, and they're enabling it by not doing anything about it. And the leaders we have just aren't up to the challenge currently about fixing this agricultural overuse of pesticides and chemicals. So for the second takeaway, we need a behavior change, because solving the crisis without this behavior change is not possible. And we need a system-wide transformation, and not just in little green tweaks. We need everyone to do something. Lately, personally, I've been trying to cut back on processed foods, buy organic, try to look at the labels and make sure it's a low impact option. These small daily decisions that we can make will support a system change in agriculture in the long run and everything. And this connects to my paper, because industrial farmers need to do the same things by small little behavior changes, changing the chemicals they use, using less, us personally not eating as much, produce will help lessen the need for industrial farms and lessen the the fertilizer and pesticides used in total. So that can be a relation. And then we have this idea of systemic ignorance. And, Greta points out we're not just unaware, we're unaware that how unaware we are. And the climate crisis isn't communicated clearly enough through the people, especially by those with the most influence, like media, like politicians. Every day, personally, I try to read beyond, headlines and whatever environmental news or what's in my food. I try to challenge the greenwashing that Greta points out by educating myself, because that's the most I can do, is educate myself at the very least. And as for my paper, much of the public doesn't realize how damaging chemical farming is. Lack of awareness allows these harmful practices to continue unchallenged, and we just need to educate ourselves at the start, at the base. We need to educate ourselves about this issue, which my paper will hopefully do. And then the next takeaway is about 4.11, which is about land and agriculture's true impact, and especially chemical use, which has caused massive ecological damage, including water pollution, wetland loss, and deforestation. And growing up Vermont, I've seen the effects of the runoff firsthand. Algae blooms in the past year have been spurring up, and it makes me more aware of chemical use on farms, that it doesn't stay in the fields, it spreads to communities and ecosystems. And this is literally what my paper is exactly talking about, this chapter, which I could use for a source. And, it's unsustainable across all four types: resource, structural, social, and self. This chapter is exactly what my paper is about. And then the last takeaway is hope as action. And, hope isn't passive emotion. It's something we create through action. Even if political will is lacking now, we will shape the future by, acting today. For me, hope means having these conversations, creating this paper, choosing to, inform myself more, even when it's hard. It's easy to feel hopeless, but this work that I'm doing right now is how I move forward and how I make myself a more hopeful citizen in this society. And my paper itself is an act of hope. By calling out these unsustainable practices in agriculture, I'm, contributing a larger, shift towards awareness and accountability. Change begins with small, informed actions like this paper, and this is why I think it's a great paper, in general, a great thing we're doing here. So, thank you.